This is the last part of the up at the end of the blow mines, and then we'll just reiterate what we've done again and again and again. So this is the last part of blow mines. To go over what we had done is we had the pupil class, which is your we had the subject class, which is your base class. So that's like the entity as a subject. You would have a pupil class, which each pupil would have an array of subjects. And then we had a TBI, a text-based interface, where we could create an instance of pupil, and that would then create subjects and so forth. Now, we're going to change this a little bit by first changing by creating a method public void add subject. Now, the purpose of this is this add subject should receive in a subject requires what? It requires a subject and a mark, right? So it will be a string subject and a int mark. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say subject at position num subjects. Basically this down here, we're just going to move from here to here. Silly me. Oh yeah, so in English now, down here I've got is where I add my subjects. I'm removing this from inside this loop because here I'm getting the user to input the values, etc. We are now not using, we are keeping, in programming UP, you should separate your working from your user interface, because your user interface may change depending on the operating system you're using, or depending on where you're using it for. Or it might be upgraded. You now get a flash system, you now get this, etc., etc., etc. You don't have to change every single time you need a different user interface plugged into it. So we're going to be separating that out a bit. So what we're going to do is on our add subjects, we are going to remove it to a separate method, and it's now no longer here. And for example, if you were wanting to run this method, you would just then run the add subject method here. So no longer are we going to run the set subjects method inside our constructor. So no longer are we going to use our user interface inside here. I'm going to leave that here. I'm just going to comment out and say no longer used, just so that we can be aware that we're no longer going to use this method here to set the subjects. So how are we going to do this then? So let's start off by going creating our graphics user interface. So we're going to go new JFrame, and then we're going to create this as our GUI. So right click new and then JFrame. Now you'll see that my JFrame or my GUI here class and my text-based interface class, both of these are user interfaces. What you'll see in the source code of my graphics user interface, design source, design is where you can design your interface, source is the code behind it. You'll see the public static void main in here as well as in my text-based interface. That basically means you can run your program from here. So like here, when you press play, it will create an instance of the pupil, then print it out. We could do the same in our GUI here. The difference is we would now need to create an area to display information. So I'm going to create a text area at the top here. And I'm going to display the information here. I'm going to call it, change the variable name, txt display yes grant.
So do you generally just rely on GUI for the design part?
You do code it. Put it this way. Yes, you can tell it your graphics design. I would always implement here. You would see in your source code, you'd see it's coded for you. Like for example, at the bottom here, here's my text area, and you see it automatically created a scroll pane. So when the text area gets overused, it's done. And here it actually adds the pane into the frame. It does that code for you. Now inside here, we can manipulate whatever we want. We can change, like now that txt display dot, I can change it and I can do any method in here. Like for example, I can go this dot remove all, and that would remove the frame that I added there. I wouldn't want to do that. So yes, you rely on the IDE NetBeans to do the coding of the GUI for you. It can be a little bit fidgety, but you've got to realize there's a lot of code it's got to generate when it's setting up your GUI. And if anybody ever complains on how fidgety it is, you must code your GUI. sorry for you, you have to code everything. Okay, so don't complain that it can be a little bit fidgety, because it has to work with that. So I'm just going to call this, I call that text display, and the reason why is because I might need to call that in my method. So I'm going to create a method called display all, and in that method, I'm just going to run public void display all, and I'm just going to run, we need to create an instance of our pupil, don't we? So like in my text-based interface, I said pupil P is equal to new pupil Craig. Now I can't do that. If you see here, I go new GUI.setVisible, which calls this method here. But I can't call that there, because then I won't be able to refer to it again. It's created, this here, new GUI, creates an object, an instance. There can be multiple of them. Does this make sense? The event.invoke later new runnable actually creates it as a thread, which means it can run in sequence to something else. But the main thing we need to know here is it's created as an object. So it's like with pupil. Pupil, we have fields, right? Because we create an instance of pupil. But in our GUI, we create an instance, new GUI, which creates an instance of our GUI as well, which means that we can create it as a field up here. So I can go private pupil P semicolon. Does that make sense? And now when I want to initialize my pupil, I would go here and I would say P is equal to new pupil. And then we would send through Frank as the new pupil. Does that make sense? And then now I could run my display all method. Now, if I left my previous code exactly like this was, so in other words, in my pupil class, if I left this set subjects here, and I went to my GUI now in here and I said txt display dot set text, which is the method. It's actually we've got setters and getters for each of the classes we create, right? Your frame or your text area that you've got is a class. You'll see down here it declares an instance of JTextArea. So there's a class called JTextArea with attributes of JTextArea, and we've called it txt_display. And you'll see inside the generated code automatically that's been coded for us, in there it says txt_display equals new java.swing.jTextArea. So it's called the default constructor of the text area. So it's nothing different to the way we initialized our pupil here. We said pupil is equal to new pupil. The text area is declared and initialized here. Same thing. Declaration, initialization. So it's nothing new, it's just different. And like with our pupil, we created setters and getters, right? Same thing here. Our text display is a class that has setters and getters. And one of the setters it has the set text, which means it will set the text property or attribute of that instance, of that object. So you can change values of that object. So like we are now learning how to create an object with attributes, the GUI we use are classes with attributes, with setters and getters. With everything we are learning how to code, we are now using in the GUI. Does that make sense? Obviously, there's a lot more to it than that, because it extends a component, which means it has frame properties, or it has properties or GUI elements properties to it. So it's a bit more complex than what we've done. And we want to set this to pp.toString. And then you'll see now when I run this, okay, for one, if you go to properties, right click properties of your file and you go to run, you'll see that it runs from TBI. If I browse, I can choose it to run from GUI. The other way of doing this is I can just right click on which file I want it to run from and say run file. So that's the shortcut. You right click on the file you want it to run, shift F6 or run file, or you can change which one it will run from. So here, if I want to run it from, change it to automatically run from GUI, that means that from now on, when I press play, it will run from GUI. That's if you've got two main classes. You would sometimes have that because you would set up a main class perhaps just to test your program. So you just run things and test them and display them directly, and another one to create your proper user interface. So you potentially would want more than one. Anyway, if I press play now, you'll see that it should pop up over here with the frame and with the text area in the middle with the text on. Oh, first it's got to enter subject, so IT. Enter mark for IT, 70. Maths, 80 English 12 or 21. Okay, I entered blank there, my bad. Okay, we got 23 for that, and then we're going to press X for exit, and you'll see there that it displays perfectly RT 70, Math 80, English 21, blank 23, average 48, highest mark was achieved for Maths. So it runs exactly the way it worked for the other interface. It's now just with the GUI-based interface. Does that make sense? So the difference is text-based interface, declare and initialize, you do everything inside here. A graphics user interface, you create a field of the class that you want to work with. You then use your setters to set your display, etc. Now, if I want to remove this, I don't want to have to where the person has to add subject once off, and after he's finished adding a subject, he gets there. I don't like that. It's not pretty. So what I want to do is I'm going to remove the set subject from here, and in my GUI now, I'm going to add on here a text field which will allow them to enter the subject. So I'm going to ask them to enter a subject here. I'm going to call this txt subject, and I'm going to put above it a label to tell the user. So you check here on the right, this is all the components that you can add here. I'm going to fail. I'm going to just make it a little bit bigger so you can quit. I shall exit it. Okay, I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger, but you see there's a whole bunch of different things you can edit. And you'll see there it's got swings. Now, a swing is a library. There's a javax.swing which has got a whole library of classes with all that. And then here you can add a lot of different elements. So I'm just going to add a label, and you'll see here, sorry, I'm jumping, but you know me, I do jump. Okay? You check the way that it's got the dotted lines that are showing on there. Those dashed lines, can you see it? Now the dashed lines is because the layout of my frame, if I right click on my frame and I go layout, it says there free design. And the way free design works is it is actually associating every element with the other element. So based on where that element is, where is the, does that make sense? Absolute layout will make it exact X and Y position. We are not going to mess around with that this term. Next term we'll mess around with layouts. For now, just keep it on free design. Don't worry about the other layouts. Just use free design. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to put a text field here, and we're going to relate it to there. Let's say we're going to make it JBig. I'm then going to put this so it's related to that, and I'm going to put this as a subject name. I'm going to change the text in here, so edit text to be blank. I am then going to do the same for enter mark. Now, in here, in the set subjects, you'll see I created a try catch which handled any errors to make sure, to prevent what we call GIGO. What does GIGO stand for? Anybody know? Okay, garbage in, garbage out. So in other words, here we are managing the users being idiots by trying this. If it is wrong, in other words, if it catches that the user didn't enter a number when expecting a number, we told the user, oi, enter a number, enter a mark, not a text. So that's how we handled it. But now, because we're getting the input via GUI, we can limit what they can input via GUI. So what we do for enter mark, we put in a spin field or a spinner. They both work similarly. I'm going to use a spinner in this case. And here in a spinner, you'll check there that I can go and I can say, okay. Well, I can say, okay. I can go down to model. And on the model, I can click on the 3 dots. And then I go to model type. I can change it to say only number. I want a minimum of 0, a maximum of 100. Step size, you could make 5 if you wanted to make your life easier for the user. It depends on what you want to do. But then it's an integer type, so you can change what data they can enter here. This is making sense. So now, via GUI, I am limiting what the user can do. Does that make sense? So there's 2 types of error handling. One, so when you get to your project at a matric level, there's a lot of marks awarded for error handling. one error handling can happen during code that you can check what the user's inputted to make sure it is. You can even, if you Google Java code to check email addresses, you'll find complex algorithms which will check to make sure that the email address is valid. So it contains an @ sign that has characters before the @ sign that has ends with the prefix of .co.za or suffix, sorry, of .co.za or .com or .whatever. So it does, it's a valid email address. Now, the next thing you would do is you make sure that all of these have, I named my, I wouldn't name my labels because I'm never going to, via code, need to refer to this. But this I need to refer to via code because I need to get what the user's input. Does this make sense? Same thing with this. I need to get what the user's input. Now, this is going to be a little bit more harder because it's a spinner, it works slightly differently. It's a bit more difficult to use, but I'm throwing you into the deep end, so I might as well carry on. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put a button here, and we're going to say here, edit text, add subject. So now, when we click this add subject button, I want to take this subject name, take this mark, I want to add that subject to the user. Does this make sense? So, let's create the method. Before I get it to work, I always want you guys, always to get into the habit. When you double click on this, or when you go right click events, action, perform, it adds an event listener to that button. So now it will add an action event listener. There are different listeners, but for now you only need to worry about the action event, or you can double click on it. Yeah. An event listener, it's code that's created that will listen for the user doing something on that button or on that object. So it listens to an event on that object. You have to code it to listen. Because certain elements, you don't care what the user does with it. You don't want it to listen at all for it. But on certain elements that you've got, you want to listen to an event the user might do in that area. So when the user's in that area and clicks, or when the user tabs to it and presses spacebar, all of those are action events on that system. So your different events listen to different actions the user does. And when the user performs that action, it will run this method. Does that make sense? So now, you'll notice when you go into generated code, you'll see there that it creates an action, it adds an action listener. There's a whole bunch of code which adds an event to it. You guys don't need to worry about that. You just need to double click on the button, and you know that when the user clicks on this event or clicks on that button, it will run whatever's in here. Does this make sense? Now, for marker friendliness, if you make your marker's life easier, they will make your life better. Does this make sense? Don't code in there, because it's after all the generated code, and sometimes the generated code, and you have to look for it, etc. So, do yourself a favor, like you check the X dropped out. Do yourself a favor. Create a method called public void add subject. Okay? Inside this code here, where the event listener is, just run the method add subject. Does that make sense? So now, instead of us having to look all the way down here and fiddle through your generated code, etc., it's just up here. And if we do need to print it, we'll just print up to there. We won't print your generated code. Your generated code gets huge. Am I making sense? Now, add subject. Where am I going to get the subject name from? txt subject dot. You remember you have setters and you have? So get control spacebar. What do you think I'm getting? Text. So we're getting the property text from that field. So that will then get stored into the name. Now I need int mark. Now where am I going to get mark from? SPN mark. Now here's where it gets a little bit more tricky. It's a get value. What data type does get value return? Object. Now is object an integer? Help me, I'm doomed. No. Yes, now get value will return what value you've chosen there. And we know that we're limiting in GUI what the user can input into an integer. So we know that those two can go together, don't we? But they won't, because this returns an object, this is a integer. It's like trying to fit a star through a square hole. We can't do it. So what we do is we get a hammer and we smack it. And the way we smack it, because we know it should fit, is you do that. That is basically the addition of a hammer to smack it through the hole. Now, it's the same integer.parsint as a method that will convert a string to an integer. But now, in this case, this is an object, so integer or parsing will not work. So what you do is what's called casting. Now, casting is a little bit of a hack, but it basically just means casting is just forcefully you must become this data type. It looks at it exactly like the data type. If it's not the data type, the machine blows up. That's how it works. But in this case, we know it's going to be that data type, don't we? Because in the GUI, if you guys check in the design, if I just go and preview it, you'll see that it doesn't allow me. If I try to enter a negative 200, it won't allow me. If I try to type in hello, it won't allow me. So my GUI, because of the way I set up the model, limits my actions, so therefore it won't allow me. Does this make sense? Yes, no?
Aren't we glad that someone coded that for us?
Now, here, the next thing that we got is we now want to go pupil, which we call p dot add subject. And then all we want to do is we run our display all method again. Done. Now, the slow clap, I don't know if that does it. Fast clap, much better. Now, when I don't know what's happening either. I will go over it again. Let's just check if it works, and I'll go through it again. So now when I click play, it will run. Oh, hello. So first thing, divided by 0. You know why it's divided by 0? Total divided by number of subjects. At the beginning we have 0 subjects. Can you divide by 0? So basically, what I've got to do is I've got to add a condition to stop that. So I'm just going to put this in an if statement, if else. And then I'm going to say if num subjects is greater than 0, return that, else return 0. Does that make sense? So I'm just putting an if statement, a condition to stop the divided by 0. Because when there is no subjects to begin with, it doesn't want to work out the average from by dividing by 0. So you'll check here, Frank has got an average of 0 and Frank got the highest mark for nothing. So now we're going to add here maths. And now he got, let's say, 80 for this. And we're going to add subject. Voila. Frank, maths 80, average 80, maths got to average that. Now we want to add T. He got 90 for that because he's special. Add subject. Okay, average 85. He got a mark for 90. So now EGD, he got a 75 because he can't draw within the lines. Add subject, and you'll see there now his average has changed and so forth. So as we update it, it updates the text interface here. Okay. Now to go through the logic again, you have a question?
So ideally, so when we started there, it said Frank 0, 0, subject, blank, blank, and Frank got the highest mark 4, and it's a blank space.
Yes.
So ideally, we want like a title scheme. So would you create another frame for that, or just leave the text in there?
Potentially what I would do, well, in this sort of level of program, I'll just leave it like it is. But like ideally, what you would do is I would just leave it. You would blank this out, so we'll just say Frank with the message saying please add subjects. So potentially, what I'll do here is in where it says average, etc. What I might do, not sure, under the toString, I might change this, saying here I'd add if num subjects is equal to 0, then else return what we were returning. But here I will want to just return a name plus \n plus actually I don't need a plus, I can just go please enter subjects and marks. And then in which case, when the first time it runs, when there is no subjects, it would just fail. I didn't put a semicolon there. So now, potentially when I press play here, you'll see that it says Frank, please enter subjects and marks.
Yay!
And then as soon as I enter in maths, and he got a 774%, and we add the subject, then it would change it to the
Much better.
okay. So but that's much of a muchness. But the main thing you guys need to get to, okay, we have a subject class. I wonder if my webcam is already picked up, then I can actually record that. Moment of truth. Dum dum dum. Dun, dun, dun. Moscow, no. No. Russian, English. I want to be English. English. Yay! Cam list.
Why would they swim in there?
I don't want a picture of. Hey, it looks like I can watch Moscow. My webcam. Yeah, it looks like it hasn't picked it up on here at least anyway. Okay, but I'm happy I can go from not the point. Okay, I'll check that later. But for now, what I was wanting to show you here, I'm wasting the time on the screen record. Okay, the pupil array. Sorry, you have the entity subject. Your pupil has an array of subjects. Your GUI has an instance of pupil, and it will then add whichever subjects you want. But your pupil is responsible for managing everything. So your pupil does all of the working out. It is worthwhile going through this code. I will explain it again with another example, but this is the first example, and I think that this has gone well. Bye.